Good morning and good afternoon. I'm Deanna Hansberger, professor of mathematics at Carleton College, and it's my pleasure to introduce our Chan Stanek lecturer today. Thank you to our platinum sponsor Wiley for sponsoring this invited address. Erica Flapan earned her bachelor's degree from Hamilton College and her PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She has been awarded a Deborah and Franklin Tepper Haymo Award for Distinguished Teaching or College or University Teaching. She's a fellow of the American Mathematical Society, and she's won the AWM M. Gwyneth Humphreys Award in recognition of her outstanding mentorship activities. After 32 years of teaching at Pomona College, she's now the editor of the AMS Notices and is enjoying spending time with her grandchildren. I first met Erica Flapan in the summer of 1994 as my husband and fellow mathematician Stephen Kennedy and I were crossing a street corner near Mills College. Erica was teaching a course for the Mills College summer program for women that year. A few years later, we invited her to teach at our summer program. It was kismet. Erica understood perfectly what we were looking for in an instructor, someone who not only has a depth of mathematics and is an accomplished teacher, but also one who cares deeply and genuinely about the success of each individual student. During our summer program, Erica spent hours every day bolstering the underconfident, challenging the advanced, advising the lost, and listening to everyone's stories and helping them to find a direction in mathematics. She doesn't have a one-size-fits-all philosophy. She tries to find for each individual what they care deeply about and how mathematics can help them in that direction. For Erica, this is her passion. Years after having a student in class, she sets up Zoom calls and luncheon meetings to hear what's up in their lives and see how she can help them with advice or guidance. She is both a consummate storyteller herself and an incredible empathetic listener. She has a gift for making everyone feel completely comfortable opening up to her, even on very personal matters. She listens deeply and completely, even if it means sitting for hours at a time until they feel completely heard. I am honored to introduce Erica Flapan, our Chan Stanek lecturer, to you today. She has been changing the face of American mathematics for nearly 40 years, one student at a time. Welcome, Erica.
Thank you so much, Deanna, for such a nice introduction. And I want to thank the MAA for inviting me to give this talk and allowing it to contain very little mathematical content. There will be a little, so don't worry about that. Anyway, I want to tell you about my story, which begins with kindergarten, of course. So I grew up in New York City, and I went to an unusual school, which was what I think is known as a laboratory school, meaning all the children were sort of in a holding pen like guinea pigs waiting for us to be experimented on. No shocks or physical torture, and all the experiments had permission from the parents. But in any case, we were basically free to do what we wanted in the classroom. There was a lot of self-paced activities. You taught yourself to read using what was called SRA at the time, and then there was math books that you could read using the new math of the time. In any case, and we would just do what we wanted, except for when there was an experiment that the education faculty at Teachers College wanted to do on us. Well, this was great in the sense that I just loved going to school every day. I dove into math. I learned to read, but my main focus every day was math. And I went through all the different books that they had for us there, and I had a lot of fun with it. But it wasn't until I went to a regular school starting in 7th grade that I realized what I didn't know. In particular, we never had any homework, never had any grades, never had any exams, never had any lectures, never had any assignments. And so I came out not knowing any spelling, grammar, geography, history. I didn't know there had been a civil war. I didn't know what a verb was, etc., or science for that matter. I also didn't know how to take notes in a lecture, and I had no idea how to prepare for an exam or how to memorize things that you needed to remember for an exam. And so, and I also didn't know how to write an essay, that I'd never done anything like that. In any case, so then when I went into 7th grade, I was suddenly hit with the reality of what I didn't know. I did know math, which meant that I actually passed out of middle school math and went to the high school for math, which was good from a stimulating point of view that I was learning new material and I enjoyed it, but not very good socially, where the kids in the class didn't like having this little seventh grader girl in their class sitting in the front listening eagerly to the teacher and would throw spitballs at me and other things. But my other classes didn't go so well. I really felt like I was just trying to tread water to figure out how to catch up to the other kids. And it seemed like such an insurmountable amount of material, not just in terms of content, but also all of these things, skills that you needed, that I always felt like I wasn't quite caught up. In the meantime, I had started a job at the age of 12, tutoring elementary school kids in math, which I really loved. So as I continued in middle school and high school, I came to the realization that I wanted to be a math teacher. I loved teaching, I loved math, but also that I didn't have any other choices, that I couldn't see doing anything else, because anything else seemed like it would need you to be able to spell or have grammar or pass exams or all of these things that I really was just very stressed about and didn't feel comfortable doing. In high school, I did have, and in middle school, I did have exams in math, but because it all came easily to me, the fact that I didn't know how to study for an exam or memorize anything didn't really create any problems at that point. Anyway, so I continued on and I went to college with the idea that I would major in math and eventually be a math teacher. But I also, thinking about the other kids in my high school math classes and how they didn't seem to want to be there and they gave the teachers a really hard time, made me think, I don't want to teach high school math. So I decided I wanted to teach college math. And so I went to college with that as my goal. And when I got there, things were much harder than I expected them to be, because I could no longer just pass tests without studying, and I didn't know how to study. And this made me have a lot of anxiety when it was time to take a test, because I felt like I don't know what I'm supposed to know. I don't know how to do this. And of course, my anxiety got in the way more, meaning I wouldn't do well. I remember at one point when I was taking complex analysis, I became so nervous that I saw every I on the complex analysis exam as a -1, which you could imagine led to a lot of strange problems, that some of which weren't even correctly stated as a problem, if that were the case. In any case, as a freshman, my first math class, I was in the class of a very elderly professor who would address us as you boys. So I was the only girl in that class. In fact, I was the only girl in any of my math classes throughout undergraduate years. And I would sit there in the front row and he would say, now you boys, I know you'd rather be out playing football, but I want you to study, and all this kind of thing. And I would sit there and, ignore the fact that he didn't seem to see me. And then on the first exam, I got a B, which was not good for me in a math class. And I went to talk to the professor to find out if I was studying wrong, since I'd never studied for a math test before. And he said, you don't really have what it takes to go into math. Maybe you should find another major. And I started crying, which probably reinforced his stereotype of the fact that I was a girl and couldn't do math and was crying. But I left his office and I thought about what I could do. And I thought, but math is the only thing I can do. And I decided I was just going to plow ahead and try to do better and try to come up with ways to memorize things. And I didn't have any choice, I felt. And so I continued on in math. That professor retired after my freshman year. And then I did get a couple of professors who mentored me, male professors. And in my junior year, Hamilton hired a woman professor for the first time. And that made a lot of difference to me. And she was very encouraging and also mentored me. And so after that initial bad experience with that one professor, the rest of my professors did a good job of encouraging me to continue on in math. And you should realize that back then there was no internet. So you didn't pick colleges or majors or jobs based on Googling things. So I asked my professors where I should go to graduate school. And one of my professors had gone to the University of Wisconsin. So I decided to go to the University of Wisconsin, and I applied to several places and got into Wisconsin. And I went there. And I was very excited to go there because my professor had told me he had gone there, he loved it, et cetera. And when I arrived, I was suddenly confronted with the fact that my background was not at the level of the other students, at least to my knowledge. I didn't interview every single one of them. But I took all of the classes, all of the math classes that were offered at Hamilton, but we didn't have a lot of very advanced classes. And so I was surprised when I got to graduate school and the other students knew all this advanced material in topology, analysis, algebra, and I didn't. And I suddenly felt even more behind than in college where I was able to sort of learn the material but didn't know how to take tests. Now I felt like I didn't even know what I needed to know to start graduate school. And on top of that, that year there were 40 entering graduate students. 3 of us were women, and the other 2 women dropped out within the first 2 weeks. So I never really even got to know them. And there I was in this class with all men, many of who knew a lot more than me, some of who were very eager to show off how much they knew. And it was suddenly very difficult. My first semester first semester of graduate school, my topology class was taught by Mary Ellen Rudin, who is this wonderful grandmother type figure who I loved, and I really wanted her to be my advisor, but I just couldn't get interested in her field of mathematics. So I ended up going into topology, but a completely different area. She was doing more set theoretic topology, which is not what I ended up doing. But the next big hurdle in graduate school was qualifying exams. And at the time, you had to either take 3 of them or take 2 and do an outside minor. Outside minor would be computer science, statistics, physics, or economics, I think, that was supposed to help you find a job. And so I decided to do that. I did computer science and only had to take 2 of the qualifying exams. However, the rule was that the exams were 4-hour exams, each one on a different day, and you had to pass all of the ones you took, or else you had to take the whole group of them again. So even though I was only taking 2, it was very important that I passed both, not just one. And they told us that the rate of passing was only 1/3. So I was quite overwhelmed by that. And I didn't know what to do. And I thought to myself, well, I have to pass the qualifying exam because I have to be a mathematician so that I can be a math teacher or math professor at college, because what else can I do? And I remind you, there was no internet, so I couldn't look at 101 careers in mathematics or any other wonderful resources that are out there. And so I figured I needed a PhD to teach math. And so I needed to keep going, which meant I needed to figure out a way to pass the qualifying exams. And so at Wisconsin, they had in the math library books of all the qualifying exams they've given since, I think it was like 1920 or something like that. And you could see all the questions. And I copied all of the questions down. Of course, there were no solutions. And I spent the entire summer, 4 months, figuring out and writing out the solutions to all of those problems, which often meant that I would figure it out myself, go to my friends. If that didn't work, I would go to an older graduate student. I didn't go to the professors because I was intimidated by them. But eventually, I figured out the solution to every one of those problems and wrote it down. And then I cut up all of the questions and made them into little pieces of paper, which I folded, and I put them into a big box for each of the subjects. And every day I would start out and I would draw one, open it up, and see if I could immediately, with no hesitation, write out the solution. And I did that for probably 3 of the 4 months of the summer, just going through those, making sure I could write out the solution, one after the other after the other. By the way, I still have that can that's filled with all of those questions. But in any case, when the time came to take the qualifying exams, we had these 4-hour exams, and I believe you had to do something like 5 problems in 4 hours. And there might have been something like 10 problems that you had to choose from. Well, 2 of the problems on each of the exams were problems that I knew the solution to, because they were problems that had appeared before. And so I just quickly wrote out the solution, and then I was able to spend the rest of the time trying to solve 3 more problems. And so I did pass, which was a huge hurdle for me because taking exams had always been so stressful, and this was such a high stakes exam. So at that point, I wanted to pick an advisor. And there were 2 professors who were doing geometric topology, which is what I was interested in. And one of them I felt really didn't like me because I was a woman. I don't have proof of that, but he did tell me that he wouldn't take me as a student. The other one seemed nice enough. I'd had both of them in classes. Seemed nice enough, but then when I went to his office and said, okay, can I be your student? He said, yes. And I said, now what do I do? And he said, find a problem and solve it. And I had no idea how to do that. And he didn't tell me. And he didn't have a lot of other students to talk to. And I tried various things, and I would come to his office and try to say what I was doing. And he basically didn't listen to me. I would see him pick up the notices of all magazines and start to look at it while I tried to talk to him. And so I decided I couldn't go to him, and I didn't know what to do. Again, I was on my own. And luckily there were 2 postdocs who helped me. And if it weren't for those 2 postdocs, I don't think I would have gotten my PhD. One of the postdocs talked to me, found out what I was interested in, and suggested a problem that I could work on. And the other postdoc, when I solved the problem, he was willing to meet with me once a week, listen to me talk about it, read what I wrote about it, and go to my advisor and tell him that he thought I should graduate, that my results were good. So right now I'm going to go to my slides where I'm going to tell you just a little bit of math. Which is what I did in my thesis and what happened after that. So I hope everyone can see the slides now. So what I did in my thesis has to do with symmetries of knots. So here's a picture of a knot, which has symmetries. You can see one of order 3 that you get by rotating it around a central axis that's perpendicular to the screen. The other one you can see has a symmetry of order 2 that you can get by twisting it around itself. And you do that twice, you get back to where you started. That's why we say it has order 2. In fact, this knot has symmetries of infinitely many different orders. But these symmetries are a little harder to see than the ones of order 3 and 2 that I'm showing you here. These symmetries have to do with sliding the knot along itself by 1 over p of the way around in order to get a symmetry of order p. And in 1961, which was more than 20 years before I got my PhD, Fox, who was in some ways the father of knot theory, he asked if there was a characterization of all knots that had symmetries of infinitely many different orders. And so this one does, but the question is what other ones do. And in fact, this knot has a special property, which is that you can draw it on the surface of a torus. Torus is like a donut. And you can see, perhaps you can see, how this knot can be drawn on that torus. And in fact, there are infinitely many different knots that can be drawn on tori. And in my thesis, I proved that the knots with infinitely many symmetries, as Fox wanted, are precisely those that can be drawn on a torus like this. So no other knot can have infinitely many different symmetries. So I proved this. I was happy. I graduated and I got a postdoc at Rice University in Houston. And I went there and started trying to figure out what to work on. And at that point, I ended up going to an AMS meeting where John Simon, who is a topologist who was at the University of Iowa at the time, gave a talk about topology and chemistry. Now, I'm going to tell you what he proved, but let me say first, I didn't know any chemistry. I had taken chemistry in high school, not very successfully, along with my other subjects that were not math, and I didn't take chemistry again in college. So I knew only the barest minimum of chemistry. So let's talk about what John Simon did. So here's a molecule that's called the molecular Mobius ladder because it looks like a Mobius strip. David Walba is a chemist who synthesized this molecule. And what you can see on the left and the right are mirror images of each other. There's a mirror just in between them. You can see that on the left, there's one overcrossing in the front, which has negative slope. And on the right, the image where the little arc goes over the other in the front, it has positive slope. And otherwise, these are exactly the same. So David Walba wanted to know if these two molecules are the same, if one can turn into another by some chemically allowable molecular motion. So John Simon proved that this molecule cannot be deformed to its mirror image. So because it can't be deformed to its mirror image, and molecular motions are even more limited than a deformation, this answered David Walba's question of whether these two molecules were chemically distinct. And so they are different molecules. So I thought this was interesting. As I said, I didn't know any chemistry, and I don't remember what question I asked, but I did ask a question. Okay, and as I said, I don't remember what I asked or how I even came up with the question. And I didn't ask it in front of all the audience. I came up to Simon afterwards and I asked him a question. Anyway, I didn't think anything of this. I went back to Rice University where I was teaching after attending this AMS meeting. And a week later, John Simon called me. And he told me that he and David Walba were applying for a grant about topology and chemistry. And did I want to join their grant proposal? And I was completely floored. I said, I don't know any chemistry, and I don't know what I would write on your grant proposal. Why do you even want me? And John said, well, you asked me a question at the end of my talk, which showed me you were interested. You were the only one who asked a question. So I said, well, that's very nice, but I don't think I can contribute anything to the proposal. And he said, well, you said that you knew about symmetries of knots. Maybe you could just write a section about symmetries, because mirror image symmetry is a kind of symmetry. So I said, okay. And I did write the part of the grant that didn't involve any chemistry. And we got the grant. And that meant that I was the first one on the block or in the department to have a personal computer. This was in 1983. I had a little Macintosh I got with the grant with one of those tiny little screens that was green. Anyway, and then I began trying to do work that was related to chemistry without knowing much chemistry. So John Simon was regularly invited to give talks at chemistry meetings. And I was considered to be his postdoc, even though I actually wasn't with him in Iowa. I was at Rice, and I wasn't doing exactly the same thing as him. But in any case, I was invited to go to these meetings and give talks, or originally give a poster, which, by the way, I didn't even know what a poster was. So when I was asked to give a poster, I found an old movie poster, which was one of these huge things that unrolls. And I wrote on the back of it with felt tip markers about knot symmetries, and was a little bit ashamed when I got to the conference and put up my poster and saw that all the other posters were these sort of nicely done little professional 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper attached to a board. But in any case, after a while, John Simon had perhaps the unfortunate luck of becoming simultaneously the chair of the math department and the chair of the computer science department at the University of Iowa. So he could no longer travel. And so the next time he was invited to give a talk at one of these chemistry conferences, he suggested that I could give a talk instead. And so I went to a chemistry conference and I gave a talk on what I'm about to show you on the next slide. So, whoops. So before I tell you, let me introduce a little terminology that we say a molecule is chiral if it's distinct from its mirror image, and otherwise we say it's achiral. So this is confusing because people are used to you add the letter A in front of a word to mean not, like I'm political and you're apolitical means you're not political. And so these words seem backwards when you first see them, since chiral means it is distinct from its mirror image and achiral means it's not. But if you know the etymology, it doesn't seem as confusing. So the word chiral comes from the ancient Greek word for hand, because a left hand can't change into a right hand. No matter how you turn your hand or what you do with your hands, they're different. And so when we say an object is chiral, we're basically saying it's like a hand. And so when we say it's achiral, it's not like a hand because it can turn into its mirror image. So with this language, Simon showed that the molecular Mobius ladder is chiral. So what did I do after that? Well, I looked at Mobius ladders with more rungs. His Mobius ladders only had 3 rungs. So here on the left, you can see a picture of a Mobius ladder which has 5 rungs. But I was not just interested in this form of the Mobius ladder. I was interested in looking at the graph abstractly and asking if we could put it in space in a different way. So on the right in the top, I'm drawing M4, that is the circle with 4 rungs, as an abstract graph. So you can see in the one on the left that there's a blue circle, and then there are these rungs that join sort of opposite points if you were to go all the way around and come back on the circle. So we have the abstract graph of M4. And it turns out, unlike what John Simon was proving about the particular embedding of M3 that looks like a Mobius strip, I saw that M4 has an embedding which is actually achiral. That is, it can change into its mirror image. And here I've drawn it on the left. So you can see there's a blue circle, and imagine that the blue circle is in a plane that's perpendicular to the screen. So the pink is at the very top, then the purple, then the green, and the orange is at the very bottom. And the colors don't mean anything other than to help you see them and me to talk about them. So what I want to do now is I want to rotate this picture by 90 degrees about a central axis that pierces through the plane, the center of the plane where the blue circle is. And when I rotate it by 90 degrees, I see that vertex 1 goes to 3, which goes to 5, which goes to 7, and 2 goes to 4, which goes to 6, which goes to 8. And what happens is that the pink edge, when it's rotated, it's still going between 1 and 5, but it's now turned at a 90-degree angle. Same for the purple, the green, and the orange. But if you look at the picture on the right, ignoring colors, again, that's only to help me talk to you about it, you can see that the pink edge is directly above where the orange edge was originally. The orange edge is directly below where the pink one was originally, and so on. And so if you look at the mirror that contains the circle, the blue circle, the mirror image of the original picture on the left is exactly the one I get on the right if you ignore the colors. So you're reflecting what goes on top to be what's at the bottom. And so this shows that this embedding of M4 is achiral, not like a hand. It actually can be changed to its mirror image just by doing this rotation. And in fact, there's a similar achiral embedding for every M2n. That is, if we have an even number of edges, you can just add one more going way up above the pink one and one more at a 90-degree angle from it going way down below the orange one. And so you can have an achiral embedding that, again, you rotate by 90 degrees, you'll get the mirror image. But by contrast with these, if you look at an embedding where there's an odd number of rungs, like the one on the left, where we have 5 rungs, no matter how you embed this, mn when n is odd, it turns out that it's chiral. That is, there's no way that it can be rotated or even deformed freely to get the mirror image. And because on the previous slide, we saw that if n is even, there is an achiral embedding. This is an if and only if. So this is what I proved that I was talking about in my first talk at a chemistry meeting. And it was an hour-long talk or 50-minute talk on a stage in front of a lot of people. And I said, I made up this word where I said, this is inherently chiral, meaning that the graph, no matter how you put the graph in space, it's always going to be chiral. It's inherent to the graph. Anyway, as soon as I said this, that this is inherently chiral, someone in the audience raised his hand. Of course, they were all men, or mostly men, and said, I object to the term inherently chiral. And he gave some reason, which I don't remember. And then someone else stood up and said, no, that's wrong. And people in the audience began talking back and forth, telling each other that they were right or wrong about whether the word inherently chiral is good or bad and why. And I didn't know what to do. I was just standing up on the stage, waiting for the conversation to finish before I could keep talking about my result. And basically, we got to the end of the period, and I never finished my talk. They just had this discussion. And I felt like, oh my, this was a complete disaster. My first chemistry talk, and I didn't even cover more than 10 minutes of what I intended to say. So they clapped, but I felt terrible, and we went out to have tea. And then one person after another came up to me at the tea and told me, thank you for the talk. That was the most interesting discussion that we've had at this conference, and your talk stimulated it. And I really didn't understand what made this interesting, but I was glad it wasn't a complete disaster. And at that point, I decided not to call this inherently chiral. And so I called it intrinsically chiral, which turns out to have been a better choice because that enabled me to talk about the intrinsic properties of the graph versus the extrinsic properties of how the graph is embedded in space. In any case, this was the beginning of a field called spatial graph theory, which studies how graphs are embedded in R3. It's an area of topology. It's not an area of graph theory. So now I'm going to go back to away from my slides and telling my story some more. And so here we are. Very good. So let's see where I was. So let's see. So I did this work, and eventually I met a mathematician who I married, who was French, and he had a permanent job in France that was 100% research at a prominent university in Paris. And we decided that we wanted to be together. We wanted to get married, and that would require that we lived in the US, and that he would try to get a job in the US at an R1 university where he could have PhD students. And I would look for a job at a liberal arts college because I loved going to Hamilton so much that I wanted to teach at a similar sort of school. And so we tried to find pairings of universities and colleges. There was still no internet, so that made it a little more challenging. But in any case, we put together a list of something like 50 different places, cities where he would be commuting distance and I would be commuting distance. And so they would be good possibilities. And we applied to all of these schools. And then I got the strangest series of 3 phone calls. So Francis, my husband, was getting offers before I was, even getting interviews before I was, and at different places. So the first one, he got an offer. There was a topologist in the department who I knew because I'm also in topology, who called me after offering Francis the job and said to me, you should let Francis take our job because it's a really great job. And you can always get a job at the Catholic school down the street. All the wives work at the Catholic school down the street. And I was just horrified, partly because I didn't want to work at a Catholic school. I wasn't religious and didn't want to be at a religious school. And also I thought, well, how can the people at the Catholic school appreciate this, that you're telling people who's going to be at their school? Like, they need to be able to pick their own faculty. It shouldn't be the case that all the wives get jobs there. That didn't make any sense to me, but also seemed horrifying to me. And Francis assured me that he came to the US so that we could both get jobs that we would be happy with. If he wanted the perfect job, he would stay in Paris. So he had no desire to take this job and have me, quote, get a job at the Catholic school down the street. So he turned that one down. And then a little while later, he got another offer from another prestigious school. This time, another topologist called me up. And he said, you should let Francis take our job because you can be a permanent adjunct in our department and we'll give you job security. And I thought, wait a second, I don't want to be a permanent adjunct in your department, it's a big university. I want to be at a liberal arts college. And I don't want to be a second-class citizen, which I figured is what I would be at this R1 university. I want to be in a department where teaching is valued and research, and that I'm going to be exactly what they want and not somebody's wife. And so we didn't do that. I didn't want to even be considered for a permanent adjunct position at that point. I know that in the meantime, by the way, there are now clinical jobs that are teaching oriented at major research universities, where I think that the teachers get more appreciation than my perception of adjuncts back in that day. But in any case, he turned down that offer. And the next thing that happened was I got a phone call, not from a place where Francis had gotten an offer, not even a place where he'd interviewed. It was the one place that we both had applied, which we had applied there because it was in a location that we both really liked. And it was actually neither a liberal arts college nor a R1 with PhD students, but we thought that we would like it there. Anyway, so this person called me up from the department and said they wanted to interview me. And Francis and I had agreed that whenever either of us got an interview, we would tell the person inviting us about the other one, so that they would know that our taking a job was contingent on our partner getting a job somewhere nearby. So I said that, and I said to him, actually, in your case, Francis has also applied and he's in your pool. So I'm wondering if there's any chance that you could interview us both, if there would be possibly two jobs. And this guy said, well, give me a few minutes. I'll look up his file and I'll call you back. And so he called me back and he said, we looked up his file and we decided that we want to interview him and we don't want to interview you. And I was, again, just floored. This was not what I had in mind. So neither of us interviewed there. But we did end up getting jobs that we liked. Francis ended up at the University of Southern California in LA, and I ended up at Pomona College, which is also in LA on the eastern end, a mere 40 miles apart, I think, which is nothing by LA standards. And so that worked out. And now I'm going to skip a lot of time. So we stayed there. I stayed at Pomona College for 32 years. I did a lot of things. I published papers, I gave talks, I wrote some books, I mentored students. But I would say two things above all from that time period. One is that I taught in the most wonderful summer program for women that Deanna Hounsberger and Steve Kennedy ran, that was just amazing, where we built a cohort of women, 18 women every summer, many of who went on to be mathematicians, many of who are I'm still in touch with, and they're wonderful people. And I feel like I'm in a true community where everyone helps everyone and everyone cares about the group. It's just the most amazing thing, which is sadly no longer funded by the NSF. But in any case, so that was incredibly wonderful and a really significant part of my career. And I'm certainly grateful to Deanna and Steve for that opportunity. The other most wonderful thing is not a career thing, but it's that I had my daughter. I had a child, which was truly wonderful and amazing. And now a lot of years pass in my story, And my daughter grew up and ended up becoming a mathematician and married a man who is also a mathematician. And so I was teaching still at Pomona. Frances was at USC. And my daughter and her husband were finishing up their PhDs when my daughter called me and said, "We're thinking we might want to have a baby, but how can we exactly do that while we're going to apply for postdocs and then tenure track jobs? And it just seems very difficult. Would you be willing to help us?" And my immediate reaction, without any hesitation, was, "Yes, I'll make it work." And then I hung up and I thought, oh my, what does this mean? They are going to go somewhere for postdocs. I have no idea where, somewhere else for tenure track jobs. If they're lucky, they'll be together. And I can't do that while I'm teaching at Pomona College. And at this point, I was 61 years old and not tired, not really thinking about retirement. But I thought, well, I could retire. We'll have to see if we have enough money, but assuming we have enough money without me working, then I'm going to do that. And, the idea of trying to get another job in some random place when I'm 61 and then in another random place a few years later seemed not doable. And so I just decided I would retire. But surprisingly, almost coincidentally at the same time, I got an email from Catherine Roberts, who's the executive director of the AMS, saying, "You have been suggested as someone who might be interested in applying to be the editor-in-chief of the notices of AMS. If you're interested in applying, send us a cover letter, your CV, and a vision statement." So this was an email. And and it said in there, this is a virtual job. That is, you don't have to be anywhere. So my first reaction was, oh, this is perfect. If I get this job, I can follow them, I can help with the kids, and I can have a job. And wouldn't that be great? And then my next thought was, but I'm completely unqualified because I've never done anything like editing a magazine, let alone a magazine that goes to roughly 30,000 people in the US. Sorry, not in the US, in the world. And I didn't have a vision. And I never even written a vision statement about anything. So I didn't know what to do. But I sort of used the same mindset that I used when I passed my qualifying exams, which is I'm going to spend the summer, I'm going to read every issue of the notices carefully over time and take notes on what I like and what I don't not like. And I'm going to figure out a vision statement. And so I did. And if you want to know my vision statement was that I wanted to make the notices broader and more diverse in every possible way. More different types of articles, more different levels of articles, more diversity of authors, everything, statistics, some computer science, math history, math education, just to make it as broad as possible. That was my vision. And amazingly, I got the job. And I was surprised that I got it, but very delighted, and was able to follow my daughter and son-in-law to Boston and now to Michigan, where they're tenure track. And it's an amazing and wonderful job that I never dreamed I would have, because I always thought I would be a math teacher, and I do love teaching and I do love math, but it turns out that I also love being an editor. And so I want to close with my last slide where it went like that, where I have the morals of my story, because every story has to end with morals. So here are the morals of my story. Be open to unexpected career opportunities, even in areas you don't know about. So I had this great career opportunity to end up doing something related to chemistry, which I knew nothing about, but which I did. And eventually I wrote a book called When Topology Meets Chemistry, where I talk about chemistry. So I learned enough to do that. I started doing spatial graph theory, which wasn't even really an area at the time when I was a graduate student. And now I'm a magazine editor in spite of the fact that I knew nothing about editing. Second moral is find something you enjoy doing most of the time and where you can be competent most of the time. So if you're not happy at what you're doing, think of something else, maybe even in an unexpected area that you don't know about. Maybe more important is the next two bullet points. One is being among the best is not necessary. I was never among the best at anything. I mean, I guess when I was in elementary school, I may have been the best in math because I was so into math. But after that, I was never the top student. I don't think I was the best, or let's say most popular teacher. I hope I'm a very good editor, but I don't think being the best is necessary. And I think everybody, if you're going to be happy in your life, you have to stop striving to be the best and instead strive to be as good as you can and to enjoy what you're doing. And the last bullet point is that I think persistence is everything. And in my case, that meant having no choice, that I kept, whenever I had hurdles that I had to overcome, I would think about how I had no other choices. So while having no choice is not a good thing in terms of the above bullet points, like having unexpected career opportunities, persistence really is what it's about. And I persisted because I have no choice, but hopefully you have choices and you'll persist anyway. And so I'm gonna end there and go back to the picture of myself. Thank you.
All right, let's all thank Erica for that wonderful talk. Erica, I just think back to Michael Dorf's talk just an hour ago, and you are definitely one of our heroes in the math community, and certainly a personal hero of mine. But you have done some amazing things. A lot of people are saying in the chat, thank you for the story. You're a great storyteller. Are there any questions? If you put them in the chat, I'll try to catch them as they go by, but things are going by in the chat so fast right now, it might be hard. But yes, thank you for a wonderful talk, and many thank yous for wonderful talks going by, and applause. Nothing in your story explains how you learned to write and use languages so beautifully. It doesn't sound like that was part of your early education. Where did it come from?
So that is actually a good point. And I actually think the fact that I didn't know any grammar and probably still don't may be an asset. And maybe the fact that I was never taught how to write in a sort of formulaic word may also be an asset. That I read, so somehow I love to write. That I can't exactly explain where that comes from. But I read things and I think about whether they sound good and whether it feels right. And I think that in some way, knowing grammar may get in the way of that. And frankly, I learned to speak French from my husband's family, not from taking classes. And perhaps the fact that I don't know any French grammar also helped me not be sort of constantly thinking in my brain and just speaking, even if it turns out that it's incorrect. So that's all I can think of.
Oh, a question. What is the story of your number theory textbook? I use it all.
Yes, I'll tell you that. I'm glad you enjoy it. So I wrote my first book, When Topology Meets Chemistry, which was published in 2000. And at that time, Jamie Palmersheim had just come to Pomona College as a tenure-track faculty. And he and his colleague, Tim Marks, were trying to write a number theory book based on the summer course they taught each summer at the Center for Talented Youth. And Jamie basically said to me, I see how quickly and efficiently you wrote your book. We have lots of ideas, but we're neither quick nor efficient. Could you join our team and make this book happen? And I did, and it took longer than my book. Maybe working with more people takes longer. And I learned some number theory in the process. But anyway, it is certainly my only publication in number theory.
So you're using your skills outside of mathematics as well. I mean, skills other than being a mathematician, you've used to your benefit, to everyone's benefit.
I hope so. I think so. Yeah.
Okay, if there are any other questions. What is your favorite course to teach?
So I would say, so I developed this course at Pomona that was essentially intro to proofs through analysis. So it was only covering the analysis of the real line with sequences, limits, and continuity, nothing more. So the content is very small, but done very rigorously with a focus on how do you put together a proof. So when I started thinking about intro to proofs classes, it seemed like all of them were done from what I would call a discrete point of view, from the point of view of number theory, as we have some of that in the number theory book, combinatorics, graph theory, equivalence relations, etc. But that when students who took intro proofs get into an analysis class, they find that the proofs are different. There's a lot more emphasis on using quantifiers correctly and being precise in a different sort of way. And so I had the idea of developing this course, and I really enjoy teaching it, being able to sort of open students' eyes to how you write something rigorously about continuous mathematics. And my long-range plan, after I'm done being the editor of the notices, is to write a book based on the course that I developed.
Here's a question I totally relate to, you being one of the only girls in advanced classes, and I often feel isolated because of that. How do you manage to persist through that?
So I don't have a good answer. I think maybe the answer is that I'm old enough that back in the day, there just weren't other women in math. And so I didn't really expect it in a certain way. And so I don't know. Again, persistence was really my attribute because I felt like I had no choice. I've always had friends who are not in math. And once there began to be other women in math that I knew, I was close to them as well, like to Deanna, for example. But before that, I would often have other friends in other fields, and we would commiserate. In graduate school, one of my closest friends was getting her PhD in linguistics, which is also a male-dominated field. So otherwise, I don't know. When I was in college, I had like almost waist-length hair, and I cut it off in graduate school and started only wearing pants. And I don't know if that helped, but it made me feel somehow like I stood out less. I don't know.
Well, let's thank Erica once again. We need to finish up here, but thank you very much, Erica. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.